August 8, 1944. A wheat field 2 kilometers east of Mortain, Normandy. The wheat has been flattened in long gray swathes by tracks, and the smoke from a burning American tank is going straight up because there is no wind at all. Hauptmann Ernst Kirchner is standing in the cupola of a Panther Ausf A, and he is watching the tank he has just killed. He has done this before. He knows the sequence. The 75mm round from his long gun went through the Sherman's right sponson at 400 meters. He watched the hatches come open. He watched 3 men get out and run for the hedgerow, one of them dragging a fourth. He watched the smoke change color as the fire found the ammunition racks. And then he did what a good German tank commander was trained to do. He noted the kill in the log his gunner kept in a school exercise book, with the date, the range, and the identifying mark he could see through his optics. The mark was a white-painted registration number on the Sherman's hull side. Kirchner wrote down 4 digits of it. Nothing unusual, just a professional habit. 2 days later, on the morning of August the 10th, in a different field, a little over 3 kilometers north, Kirchner's gunner put his eye to the site and reported an American medium tank at 600 meters, moving, gun traversing toward them. And Kirchner, looking through his own optics, saw a white-painted registration number on the hull side. He recognized it. He would spend the rest of the war, and a decade after it, telling other officers a version of this story that nobody ever believed. He had killed that tank. He had watched it burn. He had entered it in the book, and 2 mornings later, it was on the other side of a hedgerow, running, with a new plate welded over the hole he had put in it, and it was hunting him. What Kirchner did not know, what almost no German officer at the sharp end of the Normandy campaign understood, and what German commanders were still failing to explain in captivity a year later, was that he had not destroyed an American tank. He had removed one from service for approximately 41 hours, because in the United States Army, a knocked-out tank was not a loss. It was a work order. This is the story of the single most invisible advantage the Americans had in the Second World War. Not a weapon, not a tactic, not a general. An administrative decision about what the word destroyed was allowed to mean, and an entire branch of the Army built to enforce it. To understand why Hauptmann Kirchner could not explain what he was looking at, we have to start with something uncomfortable. We have to start with the fact that the Germans were better at this than the Americans were, and had been for 4 years. Part 1. The German System. There is a myth that the Wehrmacht abandoned its tanks because it did not care about them. The opposite is true, and the documentary record is unambiguous about it. German armored doctrine treated battlefield recovery as a combat function, not a housekeeping one. Every panzer regiment had a workshop company, a Werkstatt company, with machinists, welders, engine fitters, and electricians who could pull a transmission in a barn and have the tank back on the road in a week. On the Eastern Front in 1941 and 1942, these men performed miracles. German units routinely recovered, repaired, and returned to service tanks that had been immobilized, burned, or partially wrecked. In some panzer divisions during the drive on Moscow, more tanks were returned to the line by the workshop companies than were delivered new from Germany. The Germans invented modern armored recovery. They were extremely good at it. And in Normandy, in 1944, the whole system came apart, for 2 reasons that had nothing to do with skill. The first was weight, and the arithmetic is brutal. The Panther weighed 45 tons. The Tiger weighed 57. The standard German heavy recovery vehicle was the SD KFZ 9. The FAMO, an 18-ton half-track, and the manual was explicit that recovering a Panther required 2 of them and a Tiger 3. 3 vehicles, 3 crews, 3 fuel allocations, and a slow, loud, visible operation in the open to move 1 tank. The Germans understood the problem and built an answer. It was called the Berge Panther, a Panther hull with the turret removed, a winch, and a spade, and it was superb. It could do the job alone. Fewer than 350 were ever built. Set that against a panzer force of thousands of vehicles, on 3 fronts, and the answer to the question, why did the Germans leave their tanks behind, becomes purely mathematical. They had built a recovery vehicle capable of the task and then produced it in numbers appropriate to a peacetime experiment. So crews improvised, and the improvisation was forbidden. Towing a tiger with another tiger was prohibited in writing because it destroyed the towing tank's transmission. Crews did it anyway, which meant that recovering one disabled tank frequently produced a second disabled tank 100 kilometers later. And then there was the Panther's final drive, a component designed under time pressure for a lighter vehicle, carrying a load it was never dimensioned for. Failures were routine and often came at under 150 kilometers of running. A significant share of the Panthers lost in Normandy were never hit by anything at all. They simply stopped, in a lane, in daylight, and could not be moved. But the second reason was the one that mattered most, and it was not German at all. Recovery requires holding the ground. You cannot winch a tank out of a field that the enemy is standing in. Every German recovery success on the Eastern Front in 1941 had one thing in common. The Germans had advanced past the wreck and owned the terrain around it. By the summer of 1944 in France, they were going backwards. Every tank they left behind, they left permanently, not because they lacked the will, or the men, or the technique, but because the field it was sitting in belonged to somebody else within the hour. Which brings us to the Americans, who were about to demonstrate what happens when an army makes recovery a branch of service rather than a virtue. Part 2. The American Answer. The United States Army did something in 1942 that no other combatant did to the same degree. It decided that fixing things was not a support activity. It was a combat arm, with its own generals, its own budget, its own doctrine, and its own manning tables. And it wrote a rule that governed everything that followed. The rule was this: a vehicle is not a loss until ordnance says it is a loss. Not the crew, not the platoon leader, not the company commander watching it burn. Ordnance. Around that one sentence, the Army built 4 echelons of maintenance. First echelon was the crew, with hand tools. Second was the unit's own maintenance section, which could change a road wheel, a track section, or a bogie under fire. Third echelon was the Ordnance Maintenance Battalion, and every American armored division had one, roughly 800 men with machine shops on wheels, welding sets, engine hoists, and a stock of parts. Fourth echelon was the base depot, which could take a hull down to bare metal and build a new tank out of it. And moving between them was the piece of equipment Hauptmann Kirchner never had. The M32 Tank Recovery Vehicle was a Sherman with the turret removed, a fixed superstructure in its place, an 18-ton A-frame boom, and a 60,000-pound winch. It carried an 81mm mortar, not to fight with, but to lay smoke, so it could work in the open while somebody was shooting at it. It weighed the same as the tanks it recovered, which meant one vehicle, one crew, one trip. The Americans built more than 1,500 of them, and thousands more of the earlier M31 on the Lee chassis, and issued them down to battalion level. Where the Germans had a magnificent recovery vehicle in numbers that made it a rumor, the Americans had an adequate one in numbers that made it a fact of daily life. Here is how it actually worked, on the ground, in Normandy. A Sherman is hit. The crew gets out. Within hours, sometimes within minutes under smoke, an M32 from the battalion maintenance platoon hooks it and drags it rearward to a vehicle collecting point. At the collecting point, an ordnance officer walks around it with a clipboard and sorts it into one of 3 piles: light repair, track, suspension, optics, radio, a penetration that did not reach anything vital. Fix it here, hours to 2 days. Medium repair, engine, transmission, final drive, turret ring damage. Back to the ordnance battalion. Days. Write-off, burned out, hull cracked, back broken. And even then, it is not thrown away. It goes to a cannibalization point, where it is stripped for road wheels, sprockets, periscopes, machine guns, engine parts, hatches, and those parts go back into the tanks in the first 2 piles. The tank Kirchner shot on the 8th of August had taken a penetration through the sponson that started an ammunition fire the crew's escape had interrupted. The hull was sound. The engine had never been touched. It was, in the ordnance officer's clipboard language, a medium repair with a fast turnaround, and there were men at that collecting point who had welded plate over worse. 41 hours later, it was a tank again. The men who did that work were not decorated for it. There is no monument to a welder from an ordnance maintenance battalion, and almost none of their names survive. If you think they deserve to be remembered anyway, hit the like button. It keeps their part of the story visible to people who never knew there was one. Part 3. The number that explains the war. Now here is the part that turns an administrative arrangement into a strategic weapon. Take one American formation, the 3rd Armored Division, which fought from Normandy to the Elbe. Its authorized strength was 232 Sherman medium tanks. Over the course of the campaign in Europe, the division had roughly 630 Shermans written off as totally destroyed. That alone is a loss rate of more than 270%. It is a figure that in most armies would describe a division that had ceased to exist 3 times over. But the division's records show a second number alongside the first, and the second number is the one the Germans could never see. Approximately 700 more Shermans were knocked out and repaired and returned to combat. More tanks came back from the dead than were permanently lost. Think about what this does to the man on the other side of the hedgerow. Hauptmann Kirchner's gunner writes a kill in an exercise book. That entry is honest. He did knock out that tank. It is reported up, and it is aggregated, and somewhere in a headquarters, an intelligence officer adds it to a column, and the column says, "The American Armored Division opposite has been reduced by so many vehicles and must now be combat ineffective." And then it attacks again the next morning at full strength. This happened over and over across the Western Front, and it produced an effect that shows up again and again in German records as a kind of low-grade hallucination. German units consistently over-reported American tank kills, not because they were lying, but because they were counting correctly, and the arithmetic still came out wrong. They were counting events. The Americans were counting inventory. Those are different numbers, and only one of them decides who attacks tomorrow. There is a detail that makes it more human than that. Repaired tanks frequently went back to the same battalion, and sometimes to the same crew. Men in the 2nd and 3rd Armored Divisions describe recognizing their own tank in a replacement pool by the chalk marks inside the turret, or the name they had painted on the barrel, now sitting under a fresh patch of weld and a coat of olive drab that did not quite match. The Germans, in the same weeks, were blowing the breech blocks on their own Panthers with demolition charges and walking east. Part 4. What the Germans said when they worked it out. After the war, the United States Army Historical Division did something unusual. It hired the defeated. Under what became the Foreign Military Studies program, several hundred captured German officers, up to and including Army commanders, were paid to write detailed technical accounts of their own campaigns. The manuscripts are dry. They are also, on this subject, remarkably consistent. The German officers writing about Normandy return repeatedly to the same complaint, that they could not correlate the losses they inflicted with the strength the Americans kept putting in front of them. General der Panzertruppen Heinrich Eberbach, who commanded 5th Panzer Army against the British and Canadians, and who knew as much about armored attrition as any man alive, described a supply and repair situation so degraded that his formations were losing vehicles faster to breakdown and abandonment than to enemy fire. Fritz Bayerlein, commanding Panzer Lehr, the most lavishly equipped armored division Germany ever fielded, watched his formation dismantled at St. Lo and wrote afterward about the totality of it. Not just that his tanks were destroyed, but that the ground they were destroyed on was no longer his, which meant every one of them was gone forever the moment it stopped moving. And in the secret recordings at Trent Park, where captured senior German officers talked freely in rooms they believed were private, the same theme surfaces in a different register. The generals in those transcripts are not confused about American courage or American tactics. They are confused about American replacement. They keep circling the observation that the enemy's strength does not go down when it should. None of them, in any of these sources, quite arrives at the answer. The answer was a clipboard at a vehicle collecting point. If your father or grandfather served in an ordnance maintenance battalion, a tank recovery section, or any of the units that did this work, I would be grateful to hear his name and unit in the comments. Almost nothing about these men is in the textbooks. What survives is what their families carry. Part 5. The verdict. Let us be honest about what the Germans got right, because they got most of it right. They understood recovery. They invented much of the doctrine. Their workshop companies were manned by tradesmen who were, individually, the equals of anyone the Americans put in the field, and in some specialities better. Their recovery vehicle was superior in design to the American one. Their crews took risks to bring tanks home that Americans were rarely asked to take. They were not lazy, and they were not careless. And the popular image of the Wehrmacht cheerfully abandoning equipment is a lie that flatters us. What they did not have was scale, and what they lost was ground, and those two failures compound. Here is the verdict, and it is uncomfortable in both directions. American tank recovery was not an engineering achievement. The M32 was a competent vehicle, not a brilliant one. It was an organizational achievement, the decision to define a knocked-out tank as a temporary condition, to staff that definition with an entire branch, to give that branch its own vehicles and its own authority, and to place it far enough forward that it could reach a burning Sherman before the Germans could counterattack across it. That decision only pays if you are winning the ground. An army in retreat cannot run this system no matter how good its mechanics are, which means the whole thing is circular, and the circle is the point. Because the Americans had recovery, they could keep attacking. Because they kept attacking, they kept the ground. Because they kept the ground, they could recover. A German tank that stopped was a subtraction. An American tank that stopped was a delay. Hauptmann Kirchner is a composite. I should tell you that. The name stands in for a set of real German tank commanders in Normandy whose after-action reports and post-war manuscripts record the same experience in almost identical language, kills that did not stay killed, and an enemy whose strength refused to behave the way the arithmetic said it should. The men who made that true are almost entirely anonymous. They were welders and machinists and wrecker crews and clerks with clipboards. They did not close with the enemy. They drove into fields where the shooting had only just stopped, in a vehicle with no turret, and hooked a chain to something that was still burning, and dragged it out, so that 4 men who had run for a hedgerow that morning would have a tank to climb back into. They deserve to be remembered for it, by name, by unit, and by the work they did.